Hi, everyone. Welcome to English Story School, where we bring the magic of storytelling to life, helping you improve your English skills one captivating story at a time. Have you ever found yourself shackled by something from your past, a burden that refuses to release its grip on you? Perhaps it's an old mistake that keeps replaying in your mind, a dream that never materialized, or a grudge that weighs heavily on your heart. We all carry some form of emotional baggage, and it can feel like an anchor, keeping us grounded, unable to move forward. But imagine for a moment if I told you that the key to unlocking growth, happiness, and freedom might lie in one simple yet powerful act: the art of letting go. What if, instead of holding on to what is hurting us, we could learn to release it and discover the profound transformation it offers? Today, we'll embark on a journey to explore how mastering the art of letting go can completely change our lives in ways we never thought possible. Let's begin with a story that might resonate with many of us, one that touches the heart and speaks to the struggles we face when pursuing our deepest dreams. Meet Sarah, a woman whose ambition and passion burned as brightly as any star in the night sky. From the very moment she discovered the magic of movement, she knew she was destined for something extraordinary. Dancing wasn't just a hobby for Sarah, it was a calling. The rhythm of the music, the fluidity of the body in motion, the freedom of self-expression, it all captivated her in a way that words could never fully describe. It was as though the very beat of life coursed through her veins, urging her to dance and express herself in ways that transcended language or form. For Sarah, dance was more than just an art, it was the language of her soul. When she moved, she felt alive in ways that nothing else could compare to. Every pirouette, every leap, every graceful extension of her limbs was an expression of who she was deep inside. But what made her journey so compelling, so relatable, was not just the beauty of her dream, but the sheer determination with which she pursued it. From a young age, Sarah dedicated herself entirely to her passion. She devoted every waking hour to perfecting her craft, pouring her heart and soul into each rehearsal. Her life revolved around the dance studio, where she would practice endlessly, determined to master every move, every nuance of technique. She spent hours watching videos of renowned dancers, studying their movements, and trying to replicate their grace. It wasn't just about the technical skill, it was about embodying the art form, about feeling the music in every inch of her body. Sarah's discipline was unwavering. She sacrificed her social life, her free time, and even some of her own personal desires to chase the dream that had burned inside her for as long as she could remember. Her friends would go out, but Sarah stayed home, practicing in front of her mirror, perfecting her form. She pushed through physical pain, exhaustion, and moments of doubt because she believed deeply that this was her calling. She wasn't just chasing a career as a dancer. She was chasing her identity, her truth, and her purpose. But despite all her hard work, dedication, and sacrifice, Sarah found herself at a standstill. No matter how much she practiced, no matter how many hours she spent refining her technique, it seemed like the dream she was chasing was always just beyond her reach. Every time she thought she was getting closer, Every time she felt a glimmer of hope, something would knock her back down. She'd audition for dance companies, pouring her heart and soul into each performance, only to face rejection time and time again. Imagine the frustration she must have felt. Picture the vulnerability of standing before a panel of judges, dancing your heart out, and then being met with cold silence or worse, a polite thank you, but we'll be in touch that never came. It's one of the most crushing feelings, putting everything you have into something only to have it dismissed, as if your effort didn't even matter. Each rejection, each no she received felt like another weight being added to her shoulders. It wasn't just that she was being told no. It was that her dream, the one thing that had defined her, seemed to be slipping further and further away from her grasp. And it wasn't just the rejections. It was the constant battle within herself, the war between her deep desire to succeed and the growing voice of doubt that whispered in the back of her mind. Every no reinforced the idea that maybe she wasn't good enough, that maybe she wasn't cut out for this world of high-stakes auditions and fierce competition. It's a feeling many of us have experienced at one point or another. The fear that no matter how much we try, we're destined to fail. The more she gave, the more it seemed like the universe was pulling her away from her dream, leaving her confused, disheartened, and lost. But the real heartbreak for Sarah wasn't just the rejection. It was the gradual realization that she was building a wall around herself, a wall made of disappointment, fear, and unrealized expectations. Each rejection was like a brick, adding weight to her spirit and distance between her and the person she had always dreamed of becoming. She became trapped in the cycle of trying harder, working longer, and pushing herself even more, hoping that one day it would all pay off. Yet, every effort seemed to bring her further from her goal, and she couldn't understand why. Sarah's story is one that many of us can relate to. We've all been there, stuck in a situation where no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we sacrifice, the dream seems just out of reach. It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving farther away the more we run. It can feel hopeless, as though no matter how much we pour into our dreams, we can never reach them. We try to convince ourselves that with a little more effort, a little more time, we will finally make it. But in those moments when everything seems impossible, it can feel like we're fighting a battle we can never win. And yet, despite all the heartache, all the frustration, Sarah's story isn't over. There's something remarkable that happens when we've reached the point of exhaustion, when we've given everything we have and yet still don't have the answers. In those moments of stillness, when we feel like we can't go any further, that's often when the real transformation begins. It's in these very moments that we are faced with a choice: to keep pushing against a closed door or to pause, reflect, and ask ourselves if there might be another way forward. This is where Sarah's journey and ours begins to take an unexpected turn. It's in the moments of vulnerability, of seeming defeat, that the greatest breakthroughs can happen. But before we dive into that, let's take a moment to consider the weight that Sarah, like so many of us, was carrying, because at its core, it wasn't just about the rejections or the missed opportunities. It was about something deeper, something more profound. It was about how Sarah was holding on so tightly to her dream that she couldn't see the full picture. And that's where the real lesson begins. As time went by, the burden of each rejection, each failure, began to weigh more heavily on Sarah's spirit. What started as a minor crack in her belief system slowly grew into an impenetrable wall of doubt and frustration. Each rejection letter, every failed audition, and each empty promise seemed to add another layer of weight to the emotional burden she was carrying. She had spent years chasing her dream, and yet, instead of feeling closer to it, the distance between her and her dream seemed to grow with every passing day. Imagine this. Every failure was like a brick. One brick might seem insignificant, but over time, as these bricks piled up, they formed a wall. At first, Sarah tried to ignore the wall. She told herself, if I just keep working harder, pushing more, and giving everything I've got, I'll break through this wall. It's just a matter of persistence. She believed, perhaps naively, that all she needed was more effort, more sacrifice, and more focus. But each time she banged her head against the wall, trying to push forward, the wall grew taller and stronger. The cracks in her optimism started to widen, and her heart began to feel heavier. The weight of this accumulation of disappointments began to feel like an anchor tied to her soul, pulling her deeper into a sea of doubt and self-questioning. The dance that had once been her lifeline, her passion, her source of joy, had now become a constant reminder of everything she hadn't yet achieved. The harder she held on to her vision of success, the more elusive it seemed. It was as if her dream was slipping away, fading into the background of her life, while the harsh reality of her current situation took center stage. Sarah started to experience a deep internal conflict. She was torn between the dream she had nurtured for so long and the growing fear that perhaps she wasn't cut out for it. Her once unshakable belief that she was destined to dance, to perform, to express herself through movement, was now overshadowed by an unsettling thought. What if this dream wasn't meant for her? What if, despite all her effort, she was simply not good enough? Or perhaps the universe was telling her something she didn't want to hear. This thought began to eat away at her. She found herself questioning everything. The years of sacrifice, the countless hours of practice, the dreams she had been so sure would one day come true. She'd always believed that with hard work, passion, and determination, she could achieve anything. But the reality she was facing was far from that belief. The wall she had been trying to climb seemed insurmountable, and no matter how much she pushed, the door to her dreams remained locked. In the quiet moments, when the studio lights dimmed and the other dancers went home, Sarah would sit alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. It was in those moments of solitude that the weight of her disappointments truly hit her. The passion she once felt for dance now felt like a distant memory, buried beneath layers of frustration and regret. She had given everything she had to her dream, and yet it seemed as though the dream was slipping further and further away. She began to wonder if the universe had a different plan for her, one that didn't involve dancing. The thought terrified her. How could she walk away from the one thing that had defined her for so long? How could she let go of the dream that had driven her since childhood? And yet, at the same time, how could she keep holding on to something that seemed to be slipping through her fingers, no matter how hard she tried? The inner turmoil was overwhelming. There were days when Sarah felt like a failure, when she questioned her worth, and when she doubted her abilities. The passion that had once fueled her every movement now felt like a weight around her neck, dragging her down with every step. It wasn't just the external rejections that hurt. It was the internal battle, the voice in her head that whispered that maybe she wasn't enough, that maybe she'd been chasing a dream that was never truly hers to have. She knew deep down that there was a fine line between persistence and self-destructive obsession. She feared that in her relentless pursuit of her dream, she had become so fixated on the idea of success that she had lost sight of the joy and love that once made dance feel like pure magic. The harder she gripped onto that vision of success, the more it seemed to slip away, like trying to hold on to sand in the palm of her hand. The more she tried to control the outcome, the more elusive it became. This was the moment when Sarah began to face the harsh reality that perhaps, despite all her hard work and passion, she wasn't able to force her dream into existence. The pursuit of perfection, the desire to control every outcome, and the pressure to succeed had all become part of the very weight she was carrying. And the more she clung to it, the more it seemed to drown her spirit. Her journey had taken an unexpected turn. What once felt like an inevitable path to success now felt like a struggle to keep her head above water. Sarah was no longer sure where her path was leading, and that uncertainty began to eat away at her confidence. She had always believed that hard work was the answer, but now she began to wonder if maybe it was time to let go, to release the grip she had on the outcome, and to allow herself the freedom to find a new way forward. The emotional weight she carried was no longer just about the failures themselves. It was about the fear, the doubt, and the overwhelming sense of being lost. The fear that she had wasted so much time and energy on something that might never be meant for her began to cloud her mind. Yet, in the deepest corners of her soul, there was a flicker of hope. A hope that if she could release her grip on the dream, she might just find the freedom to explore new possibilities, new passions, and perhaps a new path that was even more fulfilling than the one she had originally envisioned. But for Sarah, letting go wasn't just a physical act. It was a journey of inner transformation. The hardest part of all was coming to terms with the fact that sometimes holding on to something too tightly can prevent us from seeing the bigger picture. The more she tried to force her success, the more it seemed to slip through her fingers. But in the quiet moments of self-reflection, she began to realize that letting go might just be the key to finding the freedom and fulfillment she had been seeking all along. For years, Sarah had clung tightly to the idea that the key to achieving her dream was simply pushing harder. She believed that if she just worked more tirelessly, sacrificed a little more of herself, and never let go of her relentless drive, she would eventually break through the wall that had been stopping her. She imagined that if she held on long enough, if she simply endured enough rejection and hardship, one day she would wake up to find herself living her dream, finally dancing on the stage she had always longed for. Every rejection only fueled her belief. She thought, this is just another hurdle. just another step I need to climb before I make it. And so, each day, she threw herself into her practice, working endlessly, pushing her body, mind, and soul beyond what most people would endure. Sarah sacrificed her time, her friendships, and even her well-being in the belief that success was simply waiting for her at the end of the tunnel. She couldn't afford to stop now, not when she was so close, not when her passion, her whole identity was so tied to this dream. But then, after yet another crushing rejection letter, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just the rejection itself that made her pause. It was the accumulation of all the rejections, all the hours spent practicing without seeing results, all the sacrifices that seemed to have led her nowhere. She found herself standing in front of the mirror one evening, the same mirror that had reflected her determination and hope countless times before. But this time, as she looked at her reflection, something felt different. The exhaustion was evident in the dark circles under her eyes, the slump in her shoulders, and the empty look that lingered in her expression. She hadn't realized how much of her energy had been consumed by the weight of her dreams until that very moment. The joy she once felt in dance had slowly been replaced by a constant sense of pressure. Pressure to perform, to succeed, to prove herself worthy. The constant self-criticism, the doubts that crept into her mind, and the ever-present fear of failure had woven themselves into the very fabric of her existence. It felt as though the very pursuit of her dream had become the cage around her spirit, trapping her in a cycle of striving and struggling without ever feeling free. Sarah's reflection, once a symbol of fierce determination, now felt like a reminder of everything that was slipping away from her. She saw not just a woman who had chased her dream, but one who had been chasing something that seemed increasingly out of reach. The more she fought to hold on to that dream, the more she felt like she was suffocating. She realized that despite the countless hours of sacrifice and effort, she hadn't truly been living. Instead, she had been trapped in the pursuit of a goal that seemed further away than ever before. It was in that moment of stillness, of being alone with her reflection, that something profound happened within Sarah. In the quiet, when the weight of the world seemed to fall away, she asked herself a question that would change everything. What if letting go of this dream, just for a moment, is the key to moving forward? The question wasn't about giving up. It wasn't about abandoning her passion or her purpose. It was about stepping back and allowing herself the space to breathe. For so long, she had been so tightly wound around the idea of her dream that she hadn't noticed how much it was consuming her. What if, just for a moment, she stopped trying to force the outcome and simply let go of the relentless grip she had on success? At first, the thought felt strange. Could it really be that simple? Could the very thing she had been holding on to so desperately, the thing that had defined her for so long, be the source of her struggle? But as Sarah stood there, contemplating the idea, she felt a shift in her heart. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of relief. The weight on her shoulders seemed to lessen, and the tightness in her chest, which had been there for so long, began to loosen. She realized that she had been so focused on the destination that she had forgotten to enjoy the journey. Maybe it wasn't about working harder or sacrificing more. Maybe it wasn't about pushing herself until she was exhausted, broken, and burnt out. Maybe, just maybe, it was about finding balance, about releasing the grip she had on the outcome and allowing herself to experience life without the constant pressure of making it. What if the secret to moving forward wasn't in doing more, but in being more present? Being present in her dance, in her life, in her dreams without the suffocating fear of failure looming over her. Sarah wasn't sure what the next step would be, but in that moment, she realized that for the first time in years, she had permission to breathe. The dream that had once consumed her no longer felt like an obligation. It felt like a possibility again, something she could pursue, not out of desperation, but out of love and joy. Letting go, even momentarily, didn't mean giving up. It meant releasing the heavy grip she had on perfection and control. It meant trusting that things would unfold when the time was right, and that she didn't need to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders to make it happen. For Sarah, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. It wasn't a moment of resignation, but one of transformation. It wasn't the end of her dream, but the beginning of a healthier, more balanced approach to it. And it all started with the realization that sometimes the most powerful way forward is to let go for a while and trust that the universe, or perhaps her own inner wisdom, would show her the next step. At first, the ideas Sarah entertained felt nothing short of radical, almost impossible. How could she, after everything, possibly let go of the one thing that had defined her for so long? The dream of becoming a professional dancer wasn't just a goal she chased. It was who she was. It was the very essence of her identity. Every breath she took, every beat of her heart, had been connected to this dream for as long as she could remember. It wasn't just something she wanted. It was her purpose, her driving force, the thing that had given her life meaning. To let go of that, to release her grip on the dream, seemed like the ultimate act of surrender, an almost sacrificial decision. How could she walk away from the dream that had been the foundation of her every move? It felt like she was being asked to let go of her own self. Sarah had built her life around this pursuit. Every single part of her being was aligned with the idea of being a dancer, a performer, a creator. It had shaped her routines, her friendships, and her choices. The sacrifices she'd made, the long hours of practice, the physical pain and exhaustion, all of it had been justified in her mind because of the bigger dream. If she worked hard enough, if she endured enough rejection and kept pushing through the self-doubt, she believed she would eventually arrive at her goal. She never questioned it. Her dream was an unshakable part of her identity. So, how could she simply let go of it? Yet, as Sarah sat in that quiet, reflective space, allowing the idea to marinate in her mind, something strange began to happen. The resistance that initially sprang up began to soften. It was as though, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to step outside of the rigid structure she'd built around her dream and simply be. And in that stillness, a revelation began to dawn on her. She began to understand that letting go didn't mean abandoning her dream or giving up on what she loved. No, it was never about surrendering her desire to dance or erasing the passion that still burned in her heart. It wasn't about giving up on herself or walking away from what had been her life's pursuit. Rather, letting go was about releasing the tight, suffocating grip she had on her dream, on the outcome, on the path she thought was the only one to success. What if? She began to wonder. What if the constant push to achieve was what had been blocking her all along? What if the relentless pursuit of perfection, the fear of failure, and the ever-growing list of shoulds was creating a barrier between her and her true potential? Could it be that by letting go of the need to control every step of her journey, she could actually find a path to freedom? This realization was subtle at first. It was a quiet knowing that whispered to her, far gentler than the frantic voice in her head that had driven her for years. She began to see that her attachment to perfection, her belief that she had to get it right in order to succeed, was not only exhausting her physically and mentally, it was trapping her in a cycle of self-imposed pressure. Every time she didn't meet her own expectations, every time an audition didn't go as she hoped, the disappointment and the self-criticism stacked up like bricks in a wall around her. But what if those bricks weren't necessary? What if they were the very thing holding her back? Letting go, Sarah realized, wasn't about abandoning her dream or her passion. It was about freeing herself from the weight of her fear, from the expectation of perfection that weighed so heavily on her every move. It was about releasing the need for external validation, no longer letting the judgment of others dictate her worth as a dancer or as a person. What if, by loosening her grip on the outcome and trusting in herself to grow organically, she could open herself up to new opportunities, to new creative expressions, and most importantly, to joy? This thought brought with it a sense of peace that Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, she felt that she didn't have to prove anything. She didn't have to be perfect or meet society's rigid standards of success. She just needed to dance freely, without the burden of needing everything to be flawless. The more she thought about it, the more she saw that freedom wasn't something she could achieve through more striving and more control. It wasn't a product of perfection. True freedom would come when she stopped holding herself hostage to fear, when she allowed herself to stumble and grow, to explore the beautiful imperfections of her journey. By letting go, not in the sense of giving up on her dreams, but in the sense of releasing the tight grip of anxiety, doubt, and perfectionism, she could find a kind of freedom she had never imagined. The beauty of her passion wasn't in the outcome. It wasn't in making it to the top of the dance world or becoming a star. The true beauty was in the expression, in the movement, in the dance itself. By letting go, Sarah realized she could reconnect with that joy, that feeling of freedom she had once known as a child, when dancing had been simply about moving to the rhythm, expressing herself, and feeling the music in her body. Sarah's heart started to soften. The tension in her body, the tightness around her chest, began to loosen. Letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant releasing the chains she had wrapped around her own potential. It meant giving herself permission to breathe, to grow, and to explore dance in a way that felt true to herself, not bound by external expectations or self-imposed pressure. What if the key to achieving everything she had ever wanted was not through trying harder, but through trusting herself, through letting go of the fear that had held her back? This wasn't an abandonment of her dream. It was an embrace of something more powerful. the freedom to live that dream on her own terms. Sarah made the courageous decision to let go, not of her dream, but of the pressure and fear that had been suffocating it. She stopped obsessing over how each move looked, how every audition went. She began to dance just for the pure joy of it, without any expectations or self-imposed judgment. She embraced different forms of movement, explored new creative outlets, and began to connect with other dancers who shared her love for the art. Most importantly, she allowed herself to fail, to make mistakes, without seeing it as a sign of weakness or defeat. Instead of running from failure, she welcomed it as a stepping stone to growth. And then something incredible happened. As Sarah embraced the art of letting go, she found that new doors began to open for her. She joined a dance troupe that didn't prioritize perfection, but creativity, passion, and expression. It wasn't about being the best anymore. It was about being her authentic self. Her unique style and energy were celebrated, and her love for dance flourished in ways she had never imagined. She realized that letting go of the burden of unrealistic expectations allowed her to embrace the present moment. And in doing so, her passion reignited in a whole new way. Sarah's journey teaches us a profound truth. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about making space for something new, something better, something more aligned with who we truly are. It's easy to get caught up in old dreams, in outdated beliefs, or in relationships that no longer serve us. We hold on to these things because we fear that without them, we might be lost. But in reality, the art of letting go is what frees us. It allows us to move forward with clarity and purpose, to embrace the present with open arms, and to welcome new opportunities without the weight of the past holding us back. Think about your own life. Are you holding on to something that no longer serves you? Maybe it's a past regret, a toxic relationship, or an unfulfilled dream. What if, by releasing just one of these burdens, you could step into a future that is lighter, freer, and full of possibility? Imagine the energy you would have to pour into new relationships, new opportunities, and new dreams that truly reflect who you are today, not who you were yesterday. The art of letting go isn't a one-time event. It's a practice, a continual process of releasing what no longer aligns with our highest good. It requires patience, trust, and self-compassion. It's about recognizing that the past doesn't have to define our future. And with each thing we let go of, we create space for something greater to enter our lives, something that is meant for us. As we close today's journey, I want to leave you with this thought. Letting go isn't a weakness. It's one of the most powerful tools for transformation. It takes courage to release what we've been holding on to, but in doing so, we open ourselves to a world of infinite possibilities. So, I ask you, what can you let go of today? What would happen if you chose to release just one thing that has been weighing you down? With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.